Screencast, we'll be talking about Pandas data frames. We're going to continue where we left off in our introduction from last time. This time we're going to dive deeper into the methods that the data frames provide, things like inspecting the data sets, as well as slicing and dicing a data frame, as well as gathering statistics about the data frame you may have, such as mean, median, and as well as dealing with things like group-bys. So seeing as we'll need some data to work with when dealing with data frames, I've decided to pull up Kevin Durant's 2012-2013 basketball season stats. So we have stats on the number of minutes he's played, who he's played against, his age, what game, number of free throws, all kinds of stuff. And that is an interesting set of data we can use to gather some stuff. This is kind of cool because this is my first year playing in a fantasy basketball league. So this might be fun just to explore what information we can gather on particular players, seeing how they do against certain teams, and maybe even see things about their play type and how long they played and how many minutes, how many points they'll score in a particular minute. So we have this data. So what I went ahead and did was import this data into our Python notebook. So I simply at first imported Vincent, which we'll use to visualize some of the statistics information we gather later on. I've imported Pandas. We've imported specifically the data frame and series objects. We've initialized Vincent to work with the Python notebook, and we set our print max columns to none. What this allows us to do is render long tables like so. So these tables here are quite long and won't render sometimes, so you'll get like a compressed view of the data frame. What this allows us to do is expand it, and so we'll go as many columns as needed, and it'll end up becoming a scroll bar, as you can see here. So I have then taken all the column names and wrote them out in a list. So that would be our column names. We then also took that kevin.csv that you saw here a second ago and imported that into Pandas with the columns that I have named above, and we end up having something similar to this. So the head command, which we covered in the previous screencast, allows us to specify the number of items we return in our particular set. So if you're unfamiliar with that command, I suggest you check out our introductory to Pandas screencast. So we have a bunch of data here. Not all of it is particularly useful. Like, we always know that Kevin Durant in 2012 and 2013 played for OKC, so we don't need to worry about this team and really don't care about who they're playing against and whether they're away or not. In this particular set, I'm interested in a few other things. Things like opponent are needed. So I'm going to go ahead and delete those columns. So to delete a column, all you do is simply call del, the data frame, and then the key for the column that you want to delete. And that'll remove it from the data set, and we won't have to deal with it anymore. So as you can see here, we have a more manageable data set. I'm actually going to get rid of our win-lose one as well, because I'm not interested in that as well either. Just looking particularly at Kevin Durant and when he does badly and when he does well. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So as you can see, we've removed the win-loss column from the data set. So let's go ahead and see if we can get some averages on how many points per minute Kevin Durant scores. So that'll require us to look at minutes played and field goals scored. Maybe you might be interested in how many shots he takes in a minute, which might be interesting. So we're going to do that next. So what we're going to next be doing is calculating the number of field goals made per minute and attempted. In order to do that, we're going to need a subset of our larger data set. So let's just slice that out in order to deal with it better. So what we're going to need to do is to go data, and we're going to go within that data set. We're going to have another list which will allow us to slice multiple values from the original data frame and provide a new data frame. So we're going to do minutes played, field goals, and field goals attempted. And then we're going to ask for the types of those files, because we're going to need to interact with those data sets, so we need to know what's actually contained in those columns. So as you can see, our minutes played is an object, which is not something that we can do division with. So we need to figure out a way to calculate this row of data into a manageable data set. But our field goals attempted and field goals are both integers, which are easy to deal with. So what we're going to need to do is change this minutes played column into something that's more useful. Maybe seconds might be useful. So what we're going to need to do is take this row of data, and map it to manipulate it, and then put it back into the data set. So what we're going to need to do is something called mapping, which we're going to do in Python, but we first need to define our function. So we're going to define a function that takes a string, minutes colon seconds, into total seconds. So we're going to need to import the time function. We're going to import the datetime function. Once we have that, we're going to go string to seconds function, and we're going to pass in minutes, as what is represented by the column for minutes played. Just to be sure, we're going to convert all the minutes to a string once they come in. So you're going to reassign that here. You never know what you might get from different data sets, so you need to be consistent. So we have that, and next we're going to start doing stripping the time from it. So we're going to go minutes is equal to time dot strip time, and we're going to pass in minutes here, and we're going to split it like so. We're going to have a percent here. We're going to go minutes colon percent seconds. So that'll give us the time representation, the shift time representation of our value, and then we're going to convert it to seconds. So we're going to go datetime dot time delta, and we're going to pass in minutes is equal to minutes dot tmin, and our seconds is going to be minutes dot tm seconds, and then we're gonna go total seconds on that returned time delta, and that'll give us the number of seconds in total. So let's quickly test out our function. We're gonna go string to seconds. We're gonna pass it in 40 seconds, 40 minutes rather, and it should return to us 2400 if my math is correct. Nope, we have an issue here. Minute is not defined. Minutes is what we wanted there. There's another typo here. Perfect. So we know that our function that converts that object to string works. So what we're going to do next is map that function. So let's call this data frame, let's call it something temp. Let's call it temp. Once we have temp, we're going to go temp minutes played is equal to temp minutes played map. We're going to pass in our string to seconds function, and then we're going to print out temp.head, and as you can see, we've converted all of our minutes played to seconds. So if we were to go dtypes here, what we should get is float integer, which is perfect. So now we're able to work with our dataset to calculate field goals attempted per minute and per second. Rather, field goals attempted and field goals scored per second or per minute. So I just realized I glossed over an important concept here. What's actually happening here is that we're taking the value that is stored per column, so per row rather, of the minutes played, and we're calling map. And what map does is takes the value from that column and passes it to this function, which calculates the minutes, and then assigns it to that specific column in the temp data frame that we just created. So it'll take each value one by one. So if we're to just go temp head here for a second real fast, you'll notice that it'll take this one particular value, do the calculation, and assign it back to this position in the data frame. So as you see, when we look at the head here, we were doing the operation on this one by one. I need to run this again to do that. And then, so one by one, it'll take the value that's here, run the calculation, assign it back here, run the calculation, assign it back here. We can do similarly the same thing when we were going to calculate our field goals attempted per minute. Before I show you how to create new columns with new data points, I simply rewrote our previous function and divided it by 60 so that we have our minutes played as a float, which we then can simply divide by and get our field goals per minute and field goals attempted per minute. So we're going to create a new value. So we're going to take our temp, we're going to assign a new column called field goals attempted per minute. In order to calculate values for that, we're going to go temp field goals attempted divided by temp minutes played, and that'll give us a value for the number of field goals attempted per minute for Kevin Durant. So as you can see here, we were able to quickly take field goals attempted and divide it by that value in order to give us field goals attempted per minute. So now we know that Kevin Durant attempts 0.44 field goals per minute. So that can give us a way to bear out an average for when we do that. And then if we're really interested, what we can do is we can go temp describe and see how that ends up becoming over the average. So for example, field goals attempted, the mean is 40.45. So he attempts half a field goal every minute in game, which is interesting considering that we know how many times he takes a shot and how many he scores. So what we could do also after that is do something a little else. We can do field goals per minute scored per minute, and that is simply just a variation on this same calculation, simply substituting this out for field goals, and then we can go ahead and describe that. And as you can see here, out of 81, he's scoring about 23. He's scoring a field goal every 0.23 every minute, 0.23 every field goals per minute in game is meaning over the entire 2012-2013 season, which is some valuable information, especially if you're interested in how many shots a person takes, how frequently they take shots, how does their attempts versus their actual scoring vary. Next, we're going to be covering grouping by. And grouping by is a very strong tool that you can use to split up data sets and work on them individually and then aggregate them again, or you can use it to look at specific subsets of the data and look to see how particular things perform while one thing is consistent. So for example, with Kevin Durant's data, we can see how he performs against various teams. So taking a look at the data from the original CSV import, we have a column called opponent. So we can take a look at how many games he plays against each opponent, and how he does against those opponents. So the number of field goals attempted, field goals scored, all sorts of data. So what we're going to do is use the group by. So we're going to take our data, we're going to group by our OPP column, which has a 3-letter code to designate for each team. So we're going to have that assigned to OPP group by OPP. And to see how many times each particular player how many times each team is played against by Kevin Durant, all we do have to do is something called size, and that would give us the number of games each team has played. So Atlanta's played 2, Boston has played 2, Denver has played 4, Dallas has played 4, and those are probably the teams that are in its league, which they play against most frequently. Now, if you wanted to figure out how many shots he took against a particular team across the entire season, you'd simply change this to sum, which would summarize all the values for a particular team. So as you can see, he's scored 20 times against Atlanta over 40 attempts. So these percentage values have gotten all screwed up because percentages are not additive. So all those values are screwed, but all the values which are counts, such as offensive rebounds, defensive rebounds, all make sense and aggregate well across a particular team. So if you want to see how in this particular data set, if you want to see how Kevin Durant performs against a particular team, all you do is group by the team and then aggregate all the sums for each of the columns, which is perfect. So let's just double check to see if we could do this. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our original data set. So we're going to go as data dot OPP is equal to ATL. That is our function that'll define which to select against. So we're gonna simply go data, and we're gonna go select anything with the opponent as ATL, and then when we're done doing that, we're going to then go and print those values out onto the screen. So we're simply just gonna go return that data set, and that should give us the 2 times that Atlanta played against Kevin Durant, which was in game 2 and game 24, and we can see that he attempted 7 field goals, scored 7 field goals, and then scored 14 field goals in the second game, which adds up correctly to the values that we found here, which are 21 and 40 respectively. So you can see that this is an excellent way to go about collecting data. This is another way to slice a particular data set out so you can get the smaller chunks and then do your aggregation yourself. Now, let's see if we can graph these field goals attempted and field goals scored for each of the specific teams. So we're going to go ahead and slice this out from our original data set. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go field goals per team. We're going to call that a data set. We're going to slice out field goals attempted and field goals. So we'll have opponent column and we'll have all these particular things. Excellent. So we're ready to start setting up a Vincent table to represent that. So let's say if we wanted to get a nice visual of trying to represent a particular player's field goal attempts against a particular team in a bar graph, so we could send it to our friends and have them take a look at it and easily consume the data. What we'll need to do is to use Vincent to create a graph. So the type of graph we're going to look for is a stacked bar graph, which takes a data frame like so, which has 2 sets of data, which are very similar, which is field goals. And it'll stack each of the values on top of one another, and using this as the particular key to find which bar to attribute each of these values to. So this data frame that we have here isn't easy to consume. You'd have to compare each team one by one to look at it. But if you're interested in comparing how the player plays against a particular team across the season, what you want is a nice visualization to represent that, so it's easy to consume. So we're going to use Vincent for that. So we're going to create a stacked graph, which is going to be represented by Vincent stacked bar, which takes a data frame, which in our case is the field goals per team. We're then going to create a legend for this particular one, which is going to be a title, and it's going to be field goals. Once we have that together, we're then going to scale our x axis. So so it's spaced out cleanly. I only know this because I've done this before. It's usually something you have to see with your particular data set to figure out what looks nice. So this is mostly trial and error, but I know that works well for the particular set that I'm working with. And then we're going to simply go stacked.display. So as you can see, we have a breakdown of each team, how Kevin Durant performed against each team in terms of field goals attempted and field goals. So as you can see, the field goals he scores are much less than the ones he attempted. So he attempted about 40 and he scored about 20 of those against Atlanta. As you could see from before, that is about right. Where are you? He attempted 40, he scored about 20, which is quite awesome. So you can see he doesn't perform very well against Milwaukee. That could have been for various reasons. It could have been because he was injured or did not get that much play time. If you were to have another data set of whether his injuries had occurred, you can easily show games where he's injured or he was hurt the previous game or sick. You can see how his performance varies against those days. And this is very much more consumable than anything else, and you can share this with friends and whatnot. So this concludes our more in-depth talk on data frames. There'll most likely be a part 2 where I'll discuss joins, something that a lot of people have been asking about in terms of when dealing with SQL data in Pandas.